What's going on, guys? I am Freakman, Channel Frost and Fizz, and I want to welcome you to this little segment I want to call How Freaks Paints Yellow! That's right, I'm going to share with you how I paint my Imperial Fist minis, that golden yellow goodness I love so much, with the airbrush. That's right, I'll be using my airbrush to do my shading, highlights, and base coating with a final shading and highlight touches. So if you do not use an airbrush or paint your minis with such, this video might not be for you, but you're more than welcome to hang out with me. Anyway, hey, before I get started, just want to put a little disclaimer. I do not profess to be a professional painter, and thus take any information here with a grain of salt and at your own risk. I'm only sharing here what works for me and what I like. So anyway, let's get to it. All right, so we're going to take this beautiful Terminator and we're going to make him into an Imperial Fist with my yellow recipe. I'm going to show you when I put my highlights. We're going to basically imagine that the sun is shining down, all right? And anywhere where the light shines down, that is where we're going to put our highlights. Right around the hood, the edges of the armor, like the shoulder pads, the arms, the top part of the arms, right? All the way, like including the power fist, because that's going to be yellow, the kneecaps or knees, and of course, I like to do the center right around where the shins are, the shin guards. Also, we're going to do at the very edge of that back piece, and I don't know what you call that, but also down the center of the back legs as well, by the calves. All right, as far as for shading, we are going to do bottom up. We're going to do areas where there should be shadows. Should be darker, right? We got to break that yellow up, so we need to make sure that we do that shading kind of like a bottom up, but also kind of sneak into crevices and corners. Areas where he doesn't probably like me spraying them, but anyway. I digress. So we're going to make sure that we get that. All right, so I'm going to show you the combination of paints that I like to use. I do like using inks. I typically use that one from Hobby Lobby, but this is my go-to. This is kind of like my recipe, if you will. So I use Beastie Brown from Vallejo Air and then Gory Red. All right, they're both from Vallejo, but just different lines. And then I'll highlight it with this white ink. Typically, that combination of the Beast Brown with the Gory Red gives you kind of like almost like a pink hue, which is great for a shade or shading, if you will. And once you go over it with the yellow, it's just going to look absolutely gorgeous. So we're going to add a couple of drops of this Beast Brown into the pot, and then we're going to add. I typically add about well, it depends. It's not a very large model, so we're going to add about five drops roughly of Beast Brown into the airbrush. All right, and then we'll go ahead and get the Gory Red, and we're probably going to add say maybe about one or two. We don't want a lot. Remember, we just barely want to change the tint of that brown. It's instead of a light brown, we want to make it kind of like a light brownish red, if that's such a thing, which is kind of close to like a dark pink or a light, I don't know, dark pink, I guess, brownish pink. I don't know what that color is. And then we'll add a few drops of water to kind of thin it down, okay? And then we'll mix it up really, really good. Definitely want to thin your paints, even though Vallejo Air and Game, they're somewhat thin. I like to kind of thin down my paints just a little more. That way, two things. I can layer my paints how I want, and I can take my time, and it'll save a lot of wear and tear and gooping in my airbrush. If you do not do that to your airbrush or thin your paints, then you're going to be cleaning your airbrush a lot. I mean, a lot, okay? All right, so in preparation here, we are making sure that the consistency is going to be correct. And we're going to start adding our first layers of the shading. And like I mentioned, typically we want to put the shading in areas where we know the sun should not shine. Sorry, Clarence, you're about to get airbrushed in places you don't want. So again, typically those are going to be, like say, under the arms, beneath the legs, in like the groin areas, underneath, say, probably underneath like below the chest armor. Definitely certain areas on the leg where you can kind of imagine where there's less light that's going to be, you know, bleeding off onto it. Okay, so now starts the process. So Where I am actually going to start is typically on the sides of the legs. I like to make that distinction because there's a gradient between the side of the legs to the front of the legs by the calf plates, or whatever you want to call it, the front shin plates, calf plates. Okay. Anyway, so you can see I'm kind of darkening the sides. That way, when I go back with my highlights, I'm just going to highlight the front shin plate and the back by the calves, and then leave the sides dark. So you've got that really neat transition, that light transition, right? If you look at it overall, it's still going to be a yellow model, right? But the way you're doing it is by doing this, you'll actually create a transition, make it more of a dynamic model, right? A lot of people can do this with just a regular hand brush. I cannot do it. I suck at painting with a regular brush. I can do little details, sort of, kind of, barely. But I am absolutely terrible with trying to do this. Again, my hats off to those that actually use a regular brush. You are amazing. I suck. So I resort to airbrushing. You're welcome. All right. So again, I am basically covering the areas where there should only be shadows. Again, underneath the legs, or underneath like the groin areas. You can see right underneath the arms. I've got them there. Below the lower half of the shoulder pads, because you kind of imagine, so you've got light coming top down, you're gonna have like a slight transition about mid to maybe a three quarters of the way down, all right? And that's gonna be, you're gonna see light changing there. It's gonna get a little darker and darker, and that's pretty much what we're doing here. We're simulating light diffusing just a bit as it gets towards the lower part of the model, of the armor. Really, if you look at the natural shadows that this model is casting, this is pretty much how I'm doing it. I'm just basically creating that same effect, right? I mean, you can even do this at home. You can actually just have a light top down, and you can say, okay, well, where are my shadows, right? You can see even right now as it's laying there. Poor Clarence. There might be shadows on the side. I see shadows on the side of his legs, and on his arms, underneath his arms, right, in certain spots. And that's what you can actually follow, is use that as a kind of as a guideline, right? And that's pretty much what we're doing. Okay, so now we need to add the highlights. Okay, we already added the shading, the shadow effect, right? That's the undercoat. Everything we're doing right now, we're doing it as an undercoat. All right, and now we're gonna do the bright highlights with the white. I'm using white ink. You can use any kind of white that you want. I like to use ink because it's translucent, and I can layer it as much as I want. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to do the shin plates right in the front. Remember how I mentioned I want a distinction between the front of the leg to the side of the leg, and that's what I'm doing here. Basically, just adding that hot white, kind of simulating where perhaps if the sun was facing you, it's kind of facing slightly above and in front of you, and the shins are reflecting that sunlight, right? Especially on the knees. So the same I'd like to do on the back of the legs, but I'll show you that here in a second. We're going to do the shoulder pads. We want to make sure that gets nice and bright. Now I know that there is that little emblem there. I'm not going to worry about it. We're going to paint over it. We're going to do the very edge of the armor there. I like to do right at the very back, whatever that piece is that sticks right on the butt. I guess the butt plate. Okay, butt plate. Yeah, I like to do the very edge of that because I kind of like to imagine that there's light hitting that as well. I like to do the very edges of the feet or the shoes, boots, whatever. Again, any area where you believe that light should be hitting, and that's kind of what we're targeting right now, okay? So I'd like to add additional, like I'll let it dry for a second or two and then go back and kind of make it brighter and brighter. Typically I'll do a broad shot of it, and then I'll get tighter and tighter and tighter towards the center where it should be brighter. Okay, we don't want to blast the whole thing because, again, remember, we want it to be bright in the center of your focal point and then diffuse it as it goes down, right? So we're gonna definitely have to go back over it with the shading. That this is just kind of preliminary. Just gonna make sure that the highlights and the shading are roughly where we want them. Okay, so you can go back and add additional shading, add additional highlighting, you know, and that'll, you know, you can do this before you add your layer. So that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm just kind of setting it up. So I think I'm comfortable with where it's at right now. As you can see, I have the highlights, I have the shading done. So yeah, I think we're ready to go ahead and start layering the Vallejo Gold Yellow. It's through Game Air, and I think it's going to work really nicely. So here we go. Okay, so here is the Vallejo, the way I call it, Vallejo Gold Yellow, Game Air Gold Yellow, and just going to mix a couple of drops. Again, I like to thin it down. The Game Air stuff, it typically is set up for airbrushing, but you know how paints are. You let them set up for a while, and yeah, they're gonna get nasty, or maybe not nasty, but they'll thicken up a little bit. So I'll add about a drop or two of water to kind of thin it down, so it'll get a little clearer. You know what? I should be using Flow Improver. I hardly ever use that. But I've gotten pretty decent results with just water. So now that added a couple of drops, I'm sorry I did it off camera, but now that that's done, now we're going to go ahead and start putting in the first layer of yellow. So you can see it's going nice and even. We can start from the top, make sure that the entire model gets nice even coats. You don't want to miss, you know, we don't want to miss any area, because remember, we're going to do a couple of coats on here. We're not just going to do one. We're going to do the first coat and let it dry, and then go back and we'll do another coat or two additionally. Because remember, we want to make sure that this is going to, it's got to be an Imperial Fist. It's got to be yellow, right? So we can't leave any of those parts that look like they're kind of reddish brown. Can't leave that. We got to make sure that is yellow, or at least a darker hue of yellow, right? Makes sense? You notice that as I'm dropping that yellow, it's kind of like a bright yellow, but remember, this layers. So the more layers you add to it, the darker the yellow, right? And that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for that really nice toasty gold and yellow goodness, right? So again, we're just going to rotate the model, make sure that we catch every area. And it's okay if you want to catch the head or the, you know, the storm bolter. It doesn't matter. We'll go over those in detail. But right now, this is just my main thing I want to show you guys, that I want to share, is how I actually do my overall airbrushing. Just kind of get the model ready. This is before you do all of the detail work. So it's really coming out. Again, I apologize at terrible camera work. But yes, so again, nice even coat. Give it a chance to dry. And kind of expecting it, make sure that I don't wash out too much of the highlight and the shading. As you can see, the highlights are coming through. You can see, you know, the brighter spots coming through, and you can see the darker spots, like the shading coming through. So that's exactly the effect that we want. Now, no doubt we'll have to add those back on here in a little bit, because what happens is, even though this particular paint is translucent, it does have a... well, you will eventually wash over or smother, if you will, the highlights and shading that you've already done before you added this coat. All right, so basically what we're doing is we're doing the normal coat over it, and then we're going to go back and touch those highlights again and the shading again. But again, remember, we want 2 to 3 nice even coats of the yellow. Again, whatever yellow you want to use, as long as it's thinned down, we want those highlights and those that shading to actually come through. Now, this is my go-to, typically, my ink, and sometimes I use that. I use it interchangeably with my my Vallejo Gold Yellow. That is, what is the name of that? Now, So that type of yellow is called Azo Yellow Deep. It's an acrylic ink. Now, that one works really well too. Again, I don't have a set. Sometimes I'll use that, or I'll use Vallejo Gold Yellow. They both give you the same kind of, effect. So it can go either way. It's just whatever works for you, right? I just have it out because, why not? So what I like to do is that when I have this, once I've already kind of got the model yellowed out a little bit, I like to go over it with that ink because it kind of gives it a nice warmer tone. You can see just in the bottle itself, it kind of looks orange. But when you spray it, initially it is yellow. So again, it's in the name as well. So we'll put a drop or two in here, and we'll go ahead and we'll kind of continue with the base coating here. Again, the key is thin and very even coats to make sure that there's good coverage and the model gets completely covered top to bottom. Otherwise, yeah, it's not gonna look good. So, but again, it's not a finished product. It's not gonna be complete, right? Remember, we're just getting the baseline. We've already got the reference shading and the reference highlights. That's the main focus, right? Because we're going to go back and we're going to redo the highlights and do the shading. I know I'm harping on that a lot, but that is super key. Because some people think, well, once you do it once, it should be enough. And that is no further from the truth. So, again, it's important that you do the initial reference, right? You got your initial reference of your shading and your highlighting. And then you can go back and say, all right, I put my coat down, my base coat, my yellow. And then you see, okay, now I know where I need to add additional shading and additional highlighting, right? So that's pretty much. So right now, we are working on getting a very thorough coat of this yellow around this model, and then we'll inspect it, verify that whatever areas that are lacking the shading and highlight, we'll just hit them up again, and we'll get those enhanced. Okay, so far it looks okay. Like I mentioned, we can see some of the highlights, but because of the yellow, it muted a lot of those tones. So what we need to do now is we need to go back and bring those warm shading tones back up, and we'll try to get this. You can see I'm going back on the sides of the legs, and we're just gonna warm that up. Now I didn't show that particular paint that I'm using, but I'm also using an ink there. It's called Burnt Sienna, and that's another really nice ink that I like to use. It's very similar to Beastie Brown, but it already has some of the red tint to it, and it goes really well post base coating. I don't think I could use anything else because it has a tendency to, I think, change the overall look. By using this particular ink, it kind of, I don't know, man. It takes the color that's already there, that gold yellow, and it makes it warmer without really changing the overall tone or the color. It just warms the tone up. I guess if that makes sense. Some of y'all are really, I guess, color scientists or whatever, but I am not. I just go by what I think looks good, right? And this might not even look good to you. You'd be like, what the heck? This guy's a moron. Yeah, I know, but yeah, that's fine. That's what I like. It's what I can do. Anyway, so I am warming up the sides of the legs again, hitting some of the areas where we've lost a bit of the shading due to the overcoat from the gold yellow, and we're just getting it back up. Okay, And then what I like to do is I'll probably go ahead and in here in a second, we're going to go ahead and hit the hot spots, like where we're supposed to have our highlights, and hit those back up again. So normally I like to, you know, do another coat of yellow over the warm spots. But again, my main thing is I need to highlight those. I need to bring those highlights out. I need to get those to really come through. I'm not satisfied until you can really see it pronounced. There's got to be a transition. There's got to be gradients, and that's what we're really looking for, right? So I'm hoping I'm making at least some sense, guys. I do talk in circles at times. My main goal for this video is just to kind of share, you know, my process, how I do it. Some of you have said, "Hey, I like your Imperial Fist. I like how they look." It's a combination of different techniques that I've picked up from other artists, right? And so again, this might not be your way. This might not work out for you, then that's okay. You know, you're going to find something that is going to work for you. Now, if this works for you, great. I'm glad. Then that means that I've helped, and that works out. So again, here is the white. We've already warmed up again some of those spots for shading. Now we're going to go back and we're going to really brighten up those highlights. So we're going to go over the exact same areas that we did when we did it before we painted the gold yellow. All right, so we're going to add a couple more drops onto into the airbrush here. Make sure we mix it up. I do not thin this down because the inks are very thin as it is, and I don't want to splatter. White, oh my gosh. Yeah, getting acrylic white stars is not what I want to do here. So I want to make sure that that ink, white ink, actually goes on there smoothly and without any splatter. Okay, so now we're targeting the focal points on the model, like the front shins of the legs, just like we did before the actual base coating. So we're going to do the knees, the front of the shins. We're going to do the little edge of the top part of the armor, and we're going to do the little butt plate. Butt plate. Remember, we're also going to do the very back side of the leg, again, where we feel that there should be more lighting than the sides. And then, yeah, that should kind of get our really hot highlights. And then we'll go back with the yellow, whichever yellow you want. And we're going to recoat it one more time, and that should come through. You can see here we are. It's kind of, you're like, man, you're redoing this. Yes, I'm going to keep on doing it until the right tone comes through. Remember, I don't want to change the overall color of the model. All I want to do is get a transition of the yellow is all. Okay, so yeah, again, you can see I'm right where I need to be. I'm just kind of adding additional spots where I feel that needs to really be super hot bright. Okay, and then we'll go back with the yellow here in just a second. The main thing is to make sure that we get those really bright white hot spots really pronounced, because when we go back with the yellow, it's going to mute it down again. We don't want to wash it out. We just want to allow that yellow to kind of... just imagine that yellow is like a film, right? And whatever's underneath it is going to kind of bleed through. That's kind of pretty much the concept. So we want to make sure that what is currently on it right now, you see the white highlight hot spots, and then the nice dark shading. We want to make sure that comes through even further when we go back with our next layer of yellow. So I think it's gonna look gorgeous. I've done it so many times. I always get a kick of how cool it looks. I'm not a fan of yellow. It's just kind of probably surprising to you. I don't like yellow in general, but I love yellow, goldish tones from, say, yellow to brown. I love that transition. I love that yellowish tobacco look. That's why I paint it that way. The one way that I really realized how much I liked it is, Averland Sunset is a Citadel paint from GW, and that was my first go-to. And it was not a canary yellow; it was a goldish yellow. But the problem is that when I was using that, I didn't know how to use an airbrush. I was just painting the whole model, basing it with just a brush. But I had no transitions. It just looked like a blob of yellowish orange. I couldn't deal with it. This way with the airbrush, this is gives you an opportunity to be able to break those colors down, right, and give you a very dynamic, a dynamic model with really great coloring, and you're also simulating the lighting as well, right? Just similar to OSL. So I'm going back with the Yellow Deep, the Azo Yellow Deep. This is a Hobby Lobby ink that I'm using, but it works really well. You can use any ink that's like that. It's more of like I don't know, it's more like an orangey, but it's very, very translucent. And we're gonna go back and coat this sucker. Remember, even coats is the key. You don't want to spend too much time on one area. You want to turn the model around. You want to spray the tar out of it. And again, I am so sorry, guys, for this amazing camera work. It's only the best here at Frosted Fist. But yeah, I mean that as you can't see, as you cannot see, I am actually rebase coating this model to try to get the highlights and the shading coming through. There you go. Okay. As you can see, we got the highlights that are actually burning through really nicely. Gonna turn it around, and we need to tone it down even further because this is just too yellow for me. So I'm gonna spray it down a little more with the same yellow. Remember, the more yellow you layer, the darker it will be. But again, we don't want to change the overall color of the model. We're trying to change the tone. We're trying to diffuse the tone just a bit. That way it's not a canary. Again, not a fan of yellow. But I love, the yellow orangey warm tones. It's starting to look like it's getting there. So little at a time, right? And that's exactly how you have to do it. Layer at a time. Be patient with it. Don't rush it. And it's okay. It's okay to do a couple of layers of the highlight and the shading and the overall base coat. Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make this model pop on the table. So that's pretty much it. I mean, all I did was just add additional base coating onto that, just kind of warm everything down and marry all the colors together, which gives you kind of this. This is pretty much it. It's not a completed product because I didn't do the details on the helmet, but I did do the edge highlighting, and as you can see, it's still kind of glossy from the ink, so it needs to be toned down with probably with some matte finish. But this is it. I mean, this is what you're gonna get. It's absolutely gorgeous in my view. Love how that turned out. Again, I didn't change the actual overall color of the Mini, but I did tone it down from a canary to you can see like the transitions there, the highlights. Again, absolutely gorgeous, and it's very, very simple to do. Really, really simple, and it's a lot of fun. And that's pretty much it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Really hope you got something out of it. If you did not, I'm so sorry. If you did, I'm absolutely ecstatic. But anyway, guys, if you are not subscribed to the channel, I would ask you to please subscribe. It'll help us out. ring that little bell, make sure that you get notifications, and like we always say, we love to have you as a part of the pack here on the Frost and Fist. And until next time, guys, stay frosty.